Many years ago in the kingdom of Camelot there was a war against the Empire, which claimed the lives of thousands of ordinary people. Russell Raymond was an aristocratic child whose parents died during this war. A couple of years after the death of Russell's parents, he was expelled from the Magical Academy of Camelot. Despite Russell's excellent theoretical knowledge, it was very difficult for him to use his knowledge in practice. The reason why Russell was unable to use his skills in practice was due to the narrowing of his mana veins. The narrowing of mana veins limits a person from receiving and using any amount of mana, which in turn made it very difficult to use various magical techniques. From birth, Russell had very thin and weak veins of mana, which is why he could not use even the simplest magic techniques. Several years have passed since that moment, and during this time Russell left Camelot and became a mercenary who performed various tasks to earn his living. One day, Russell decided to return back to Camelot, as they were urgently looking for mercenaries in the White Tower. At first, the local guards did not recognize Russell, focusing all their attention on his appearance, which reminded them more of a simple tramp, which is why they initially refused to let Russell into the city. However, one of the guards still recognized Russell, after which he apologized to him and let him into the city. A few minutes later Russell reached that same White Tower. Russell looked at this tower and thought about how back in the academy he tried his best to get into it. Russell thought that during his work as a mercenary, he still managed to enter the second circle, while at the academy he could not manage to achieve this. A few minutes later, a man in a white robe came out of the White Tower, who told all the assembled citizens that registration for temporary work was over for today, and that all the people who came here can go about their business. Russell looked at the angry crowd and thought that these people simply do not have a choice, and that they are just trying to grab any opportunity to earn money. Russell accidentally heard from passers-by that the local museum needed magicians. Russell felt that the museum was simply recruiting new cleaners, and that there was nothing special waiting for these people. But Russell had very little money, and he decides to take advantage of this simple, but at the same time the only opportunity to earn at least a little. Later, the owner of the museum gave Russell and a few other guys a brief tour of the museum, telling them where and what exhibits are. The owner of the museum told the new employees that very important and wealthy tourists from aristocratic families would soon come to the museum. Also, the owner of the museum told the workers to be very careful to use any magic in the cleaning process, because if at least one exhibit is damaged, then all responsibility will be on them. Despite the seriousness of the owner, Russell understood that most likely all these exhibits were not real. Passing by the Hall of Fantastic Creatures, Russell suddenly felt an unusual feeling, as if he was familiar with this place. After a couple of seconds, Russell felt some strange vibration in his pocket. Russell reached into his pants and pulled out his late mother's ring. Russell understood that he had nothing to do in this room, but his feet themselves led him there, as if something was beckoning him there. Then Russell decides to leave the group of other workers and find out what exactly attracts him to this hall so much. However, after a few seconds, the owner of the museum still notices the loss of Russell, and he and the rest of the workers decide to find Russell. Once in the Hall of Fantastic Creatures, Russell saw in front of him a huge skeleton of an extinct dragon. Russell felt his mother's ring begin to vibrate more and more. Russell didn't understand why his mother's ring was vibrating like that, and he figured the ring might lead him to something valuable. Russell closed his eyes and he remembered the day when he and his mother also walked through this hall, when he was still a little boy. Russell recalled how he was very interested in one dark area of the hall, into which not a single museum visitor entered. Then Russell decided to go into this area and find out what was there after all. In front of Russell was a bedside table, on which was the heart of that dragon, whose skeleton stood in the center of the hall. Russell shifted his gaze from the dragon's heart to his mother's ring, which very much reminded him of a dragon's eye. When Russell brought the ring closer to his heart, he noticed that a tear suddenly poured out of the eye on the ring. Then Russell decides to finally put on the ring to see what happens. However, when Russell put the ring on, it just stopped vibrating and nothing else happened. At first, Russell thought that he was simply waiting for some changes in vain, but after a couple of seconds, the ring began to emit a bright red light. After this powerful radiation, Russell found himself in one strange place, in which there was only one huge dragon, which told Russell that he was the first small element in some very important matter. The dragon also said that he would give Russell a second chance for the benefit of all world magic. At that moment, Russell realized that the one world mechanism was broken, and that he must restore this mechanism, after which he again moved somewhere. When Russell returned, he found himself in one of the familiar rooms of the Magic Academy, from which he had been expelled. When Russell regained consciousness, he suddenly felt a strong blow to his head. It turned out to be Professor Hubert, who worked at the Camelot Magic Academy, who told Russell that despite his good academic performance, he couldn't just sleep in class. Russell did not understand why a living, healthy professor was standing in front of him when he himself saw his death. Meanwhile, all of Russell's classmates turned their full attention to him. Russell also noticed that his museum janitor's uniform had changed to the uniform of Camelot Magic Academy students. Then Russell finally realized that he had somehow ended up in the past. Professor Hubert did not understand why Russell suddenly fell asleep in his class, since he had never done this before, after which he kicked Russell out of the office. Once in the office, Russell began to think about how he managed to get into the past. Then Russell remembered the dragon's words that he was the first small element in some very important matter, and that he had been given a second chance. Then Russell realized that by a second chance, this dragon meant his return to the past. After this, Russell looked at his palm and noticed that his mother's ring was not on his finger. Then Russell believed that it was his mother who helped him get into the past. At that moment, Professor Hubert came out of the office and wanted to talk to Russell about today's incident. Russell began to apologize to the professor, to which he told Russell that they should talk about it alone today in his office. Professor Hubert left, while Russell himself thought that he had not been in such unpleasant situations for a long time, and that he somehow even liked such situations. After that, Russell felt someone push him very hard with a blow to his head. Behind Russell was Anton Frederick with two of his thug friends, who very often offended Russell and caused him a lot of various troubles. One of Anton's thugs didn't hold back and was about to hit Russell again. However, Anton himself stopped his friend, fearing that the elders were looking at them. After that, Anton turned to Russell, reminding him that he had to write him an outline. Anton told Russell to go to the toilet with him right now to deal with each other like men, after which they headed towards the toilet. Russell recalled that similar situations very often happened to him, from which he never emerged victorious. After Anton Frederick disappeared from Russell's field of vision, a strange translucent message window appeared in front of Russell, which indicated the task for Russell, in which he had to take revenge on his offenders. Russell did not understand why this message appeared in front of him, and he decides to check if anyone else sees it. Meanwhile, Anton shouted to Russell to hurry up, since it is useless to run from this conflict, because they are always on the territory of the academy. Then Russell was determined to teach these scoundrels a lesson, not because of the task, but because he himself wanted to do it. Throughout Russell's time as a mercenary, he had learned that nothing could amuse him more than seeing his enemies suffer. Anton Frederick and his thug friends were already waiting for Russell in the academy toilet to mock him without unnecessary witnesses. A minute later, Russell finally came to the toilet to make his offenders suffer and suffer. At first, Anton and his friends were a little scared by how boldly Russell approached them. Then Anton's first friend decides to hit Russell without warning. But despite such a quick blow, Russell not only manages to dodge such an unexpected attack, but also hits his attacker in the stomach with all his might. Russell's blow was so strong that Anton's injured friend was thrown towards Anton's second friend, which scared him very much. Then the second friend decides to fight back against Russell and rushes to attack him. However, the second friend did not even have time to attack Russell in any way, and he immediately received a fist in the face, from which he flew towards Anton himself. Despite the fact that little Russell easily defeated two guys who were much larger than him, Anton still did not show any signs of fear. Anton threw his smoking pipe on the floor and began to approach Russell, telling him that due to the fact that he could not use magic, he decided to learn a few simple techniques for hand-to-hand combat. Also, Anton did not hesitate to insult Russell, reminding him of the death of his parents, which only set Russell more strongly. While Anton was heading towards Russell, he decided to use magic to create a magical brass knuckles. Anton also said that it is forbidden to use magic in full force on the territory of the academy, but at the same time, nothing prevents him from using simple spells. After that, Anton pounced on Russell to deprive Russell of consciousness and calmly finish him off. But despite such a strong and powerful swing, Russell was able to grab Anton's hand and stop his attack, which frightened Anton very much. After this, Russell decided to start breaking his arm in order to finally finish him off both physically and mentally. Anton was in such severe pain that he fell to the ground from unbearable pain. To break Anton, Russell reminded him that Anton's older brothers themselves lowered his rank, and that no one from his family relied on him, and that he was acting like a real coward, since he tried to be careful with a strong interlocutor and offended those who is weaker than him. Russell became even more angry at the helpless Anton when he dared to mention his dead parents. Russell was already preparing to deal Anton the final and heaviest blow, while Anton himself could only beg Russell for mercy. But Russell was already unstoppable, and he no longer listened to Anton's pleas, but simply swung at Anton as hard as possible. After that, Russell decided to leave the toilet, in which 3 bodies lay unconscious. In the end, Russell whispered in their direction that if they ever tried to offend someone, then next time he would not show any mercy to them. After Russell left the toilet, he leaned against one of the walls completely exhausted, wondering if he had gone too far with them. In addition, Russell never stopped experiencing incredible pain and fatigue in his eyes after what happened. At this moment, a message appeared in front of Russell again, indicating that his task had been successfully completed. After that, a low-level magic stone appeared in Russell's hands, which was given to him by this mysterious message. The message stated that Russell should eat the magic stone he received, but Russell did not understand how he could eat some unknown stone. Russell thought that even such undeveloped creatures as cavemen would not eat stones. However, apparently, Russell has no choice but to eat this magic stone. While Russell was chewing the magic stone, he thought that it was possible to do such things here. When Russell swallowed the magic stone, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. At this moment, a message appeared in front of Russell, indicating that Russell had received mana. At that moment, Russell felt himself overwhelmed by a power he had never felt before. Also during this, Russell's mana circle also continued to grow, after which Russell's condition returned to normal. The process was soon completed, and Russell figured that he could now strengthen and expand his mana veins. Russell also believed that in this state, he could easily avoid all the unpleasant events, such as the death of his parents and his expulsion from the magical academy, that happened to him in a past life. Later, Russell remembered that Professor Hubert wanted to have a conversation with him, after which Russell went to his office. Once in the office, Russell saw Professor Hubert in him, who was waiting for Russell to come over a cup of tea. When Russell sat down opposite Professor Hubert, he told Russell that he was somehow different from usual today. Then Professor Hubert decided to ask Russell if Russell was currently having any difficulties that were preventing him from concentrating. Professor Hubert also noticed that Russell is now having some problems with older guys who offend him. Russell looked at Professor Hubert, and remembered that he was one of the few people around him who did not lose hope in him. Russell, with a light heart, told Professor Hubert that he was fine and that the professor did not have to worry about him. Professor Hubert was very surprised that Russell answered him so confidently. After this, Professor Hubert told Russell that one of his responsibilities at the academy was to take care of the students. Professor Hubert also added that despite all this, he still had to give Russell some kind of punishment. Then Professor Hubert ordered Russell to write a report on enhanced magic. The professor warned that even high school students would find it extremely difficult to cope with such a task. At this moment, a message with a task appeared in front of Russell again, which required him to complete an assignment from Professor Hubert, and depending on his grade, an additional reward also awaited him. And Russell was surprised that among such tasks there could be assignments from the professor. Professor Hubert noticed the surprise on Russell's face, and he felt that he had given him too difficult a task. However, Russell said that he would cope with such a task, after which he said goodbye to Professor Hubert and left his office. In a past life, Russell spent a lot of time studying the theoretical part at the academy in order to somehow compensate for his weak magical skills, and even when he was expelled from the academy, he did not stop learning something new. That evening, Russell completed the task given to him by Professor Hubert without any problems. However, Russell thought that now it was important for him to develop his knowledge, but also to train the endurance of his mana veins. The vessels through which mana flows in the human body are one of the parts of the organ system that is responsible for the circulation of mana throughout the body. Mana is absorbed in the human body as he breathes, and therefore, in the process of circulation throughout the body, it accumulates in the heart. After all the mana has been accumulated in the heart, the mana is released, during which the person uses magical techniques and skills. The more mana accumulated in a person's veins, the more it accumulated in the heart, and the stronger and more often a person could use it. However, Russell had very weak mana veins in a past life, which is why he could not use many magical abilities. During the next task, the enemy struck Russell with such a powerful blow that Russell broke through a stone wall and ended up in a cave unknown to him. When Russell came to his senses, he saw two grimoires at one end of the cave. The first grimoire was about training the body to expand the mana veins, and the second grimoire contained a guide to replacing human muscles with mana veins. Using the knowledge from these grimoires, Russell trained his body, as physique also played an important role in the development of mana veins. Russell sincerely believed that if he trained hard, he could overcome his mana vein constriction. After training, Russell decided that he had enough for today and that it was time for him to rest. But a message appeared in front of him again, in which a new task appeared, in which Russell had to run 5 kilometers, after which he would work out the magic through the veins, and the indicator mastery of this magic will be increased. Russell was not satisfied with the fact that this message window gave him this task right now, when he was already exhausted. It was also stated in the message that Russell can complete the quest to develop the magic through the veins as much as he wants, and depending on how well Russell does the quest, the distance will also increase, and after a certain level, the quest will simply disappear. Russell decided not to waste time in vain, and he still decides to finish his workout today with a run. A few minutes later, Russell still managed to run 5 kilometers, after which a message appeared in front of him, which said that today's task was completed, and that the reward was already waiting for him. Despite the fact that Russell's legs were very sore after such a distance, he was still glad that he had finally completed this task. At this point, Russell was being watched by Anton Frederick, who thought only that these trainings would not give Russell any results. The next day, Russell handed over to Professor Hubert the task he had assigned him. Professor Hubert was surprised at how deeply and accurately Russell wrote the report, and at first he even doubted that Russell had written it himself. Russell told Professor Hubert that he did everything himself, taking an oath on mana. Professor Hubert was surprised by how Russell gave him his oath on mana, since not everyone is able to make such an oath with such confidence. Professor Hubert believed Russell and told him that he really liked his work. After these words, a message appeared in front of Russell, stating that the quest had been successfully completed, and that he was receiving a low-level magic stone, an increase in the level of understanding of the art of summoning monsters, and several more additional magic upgrades. Russell suggested that the higher his level of understanding, the stronger he becomes, and then he decides to ask Professor Hubert for one favor. Russell asked Professor Hubert for access to the department's library. Professor Hubert said that Russell did not need access to the department's library archive, since the standard library should meet all his theoretical needs. However, Russell said that he had read absolutely every book in the standard library, and Professor Hubert was very surprised by this statement. Professor Hubert, not believing what he heard, told Russell that even if this was true, he still had to make sure of his competence. Russell said that he was ready to do anything for this, and Professor Hubert gave him a lot of tasks that he must complete in order to access the department library archive, and which appeared in Russell's message window, after which Russell left Professor Hubert's office. After this conversation, Russell went to another training session, thinking that Professor Hubert really gave him a lot of tasks, which only confirmed the words that Professor Hubert was very picky. Russell also understood that the higher his level of understanding, the stronger his magic, and therefore he needed to get an advanced level of knowledge by any means. Russell drank the contents of his flask and thought that by completing all the tasks from Professor Hubert, he would not only gain access to the department's library archive, but also receive magic stones for it. At that moment, Anton Frederick approached Russell with his friends, who said that his friends had suffered because of him. At first, Russell thought that Anton came to him to avenge that fight in the toilet. Anton only said that he would not take revenge on such a non-entity as Russell, and that it would be enough for him to trample his face into the dirt. After that, Anton shoved Russell on the shoulder, telling him that they would definitely meet in class, after which he moved on with his friends. While Anton and his friends were leaving, his friends tried to find out from him why he did not take revenge on Russell now, to which he replied that there was no crowd here at all in front of which they could humiliate Russell. Russell understood that Anton meant that he wanted to humiliate him in a magic combat class where students fight at the same level fight against each other, and it was in this lesson that Russell always lost to his rivals. Russell figured that if he didn't train, he would lose again, and so he got serious about this upcoming battle. At this moment, a message appeared in front of Russell again, which indicated the task, in order to increase which he had to reach the second magical level, increasing all the levels of understanding that he had mastered. For many days, Russell has been training hard and completing all of Professor Hubert's tasks in order to increase his skill level as best and as quickly as possible. One day, Russell was still able to hand over to Professor Hubert all the tasks that he assigned to him, as a result of which all the tasks in Russell's message were counted as completed. In the evening, Russell received for all completed tasks the corresponding number of magic stones, which were enough for him to achieve a new magic circle. At first, Russell was going to absorb all these magic stones, but he wondered if he could withstand all the magical energy that he would receive from them. Russell only hoped that all his training was not in vain, after which he absorbed all the magic stones at once. At first, Russell did not feel any changes on himself, but within seconds he felt his body emitting a huge amount of mana. Russell was in such severe pain that it seemed that right now his entire body would simply burn alive from an overabundance of mana. However, Russell tried to only think about the fact that he needed to focus all his mana in order to move to the second magic circle. Russell was also afraid that if he could not hold all the accumulated mana in himself, then his heart simply could not withstand such a flow of mana and would stop, because of which Russell could die. But despite all his fears, Russell made a decision for himself that all the accumulated mana would definitely belong to him, and with such thoughts, he began to concentrate all the mana in himself. After a few minutes of holding back his mana, Russell was still able to stop the mana burst process, due to which he managed to go to the second magic circle. After transferring to the second magic circle, Russell fell to the floor with no powers, and he received an increase in understanding of some magical arts, such as the arts of fire, water, electrical powers, and other arts. The next day, Russell came to Professor Hubert, who at that time checked all of Russell's assignments. However, for the final result, he had to ask Russell only one question, which would bring him closer to the whole truth. Professor Hubert asked Russell which of the 4 stages of magic was the most important. While Russell remained silent for a while, Professor Hubert remembered that he had already discussed this issue with one of his students. Then Professor Hubert decided to ask Russell another question, but he interrupted Professor Hubert, intending to give him an answer to the question. Professor Hubert was very surprised that Russell would now give him an answer. Then Russell replied that the most important stage in the use of magic is the performance, and Professor Hubert wondered why he thought so. Russell began to explain that the process of using magic consists of 4 stages: understanding, imagining, constructing, and manifesting. Understanding is the study of the principles of various natural objects and phenomena. During the presentation, a person mentally pictures what he wants to put into practice. During the construction process, the magician applies previously learned formulas and rules for the correctness of the further process. In manifestation, the final rebirth of a magical object in the real world occurs. Stages such as understanding, construction, and manifestation can be achieved through a process of persistent learning. However, all these efforts do not affect the performance in any way, and it can be realized through the freedom of imagination that arises from courage. Russell gave the example of fire, which he can imagine as an arrow, and then he will create a fiery arrow. If Russell imagines any other object or phenomenon, then when using magic, exactly the object or phenomenon that he presented will appear. However, if Russell does not define for himself the boundaries of his mental visualization, then he will be able to create something unthinkable that simply does not exist in this world. Russell also said that it is impossible to create things that contradict their original properties, such as a shadow emitting light, warm ice, and other similar things. In the end, Russell added that all magic begins with an understanding of the elementary laws of the world and ends with the ability to control these laws. Having heard such an accurate answer, Professor Hubert told Russell that he could now use the archives of the department library at any time. A couple of minutes later, Russell was already studying the contents of the archive, thinking that even on the first floor there was a lot of different material that was useful for him to study. Absolutely everything about this place was different from the usual library that other students at the academy go to. After a few more minutes, Russell picked out several books for himself to study, and he was satisfied that the rules from these books did not contradict the most basic rules for using magic. While Russell was engrossed in the book, someone behind him told him that he was holding a very interesting book in his hands. At first, Russell was a little scared that someone was watching him, but this person told him that she was in front of him. This person turned out to be Daria Snow White, who was the master of the Fire Tower. Russell immediately stood in front of her, greeted her, and introduced himself to her. Daria became one of the few magicians in the world who managed to reach the 8th magic circle, and therefore she possessed the best magic tower in the Red Tower's faction, and despite her 80 years of life, she looked like a young girl, since she spent a lot of mana on maintaining your image. However, Russell still could not understand what Daria was doing at the academy. Daria only said that Russell had nothing to worry about, since she was nothing more than a simple interlocutor for him, after which she handed him a lollipop as a sign of her goodwill towards him. While Russell and Daria were walking around the library, Daria decided to ask Russell how he was able to get into this library. Russell only replied that Professor Hubert had given him access to the department's library archives. Then Daria concluded that Russell was specifically studying something really interesting. Meanwhile, Daria was also inspecting Russell's magical energy, and she was surprised at how pure his mana was and how well and evenly it was distributed throughout his body. Paying attention to Daria's gaze, Russell began to worry that she might see something in him. However, Daria told Russell that he had nothing to worry about, as she was here to teach him. Russell immediately calmed down and thanked Daria for being ready to teach him. Daria told Russell that he should by all means improve his physical and magical abilities, after which she left the library. Toward evening, Russell also began to get ready to go home, without ceasing to think about his meeting with Daria. When Russell left the library, Anton and his friends drew attention to him. Anton said that Russell was just sucking up to one of the teachers to get into the library. Anton also added that despite all his efforts, Russell would still not achieve anything. The next day, the academy held a general practical class on magic combat. The essence of the lesson is that the one whose name is called first enters the arena and chooses an opponent for a magical battle. The names of the weakest students are usually called out first so that they can choose an opponent who will be on the same level as them. And so in his past life, Russell was called out first every time, and so far he has never been able to defeat his opponents. When one of the professors was about to name the first student, everyone thought that the professor would name Russell first again. However, no one expected that the first one whose name he would mention would be Anton Frederick. No one could understand why the professor called Anton to the arena. Anton thanked the professor in a quiet voice, to which he said that this service was incomparable to how the Association of Merchants of the Seven Fredericks once helped him. At that moment, Russell realized what lesson Anton had told him about that time. When Anton entered the arena, he immediately fixed his gaze on Russell and shouted at him to come down to him now. Meanwhile, Professor Hubert talks to Daria, asking her to warn him about her visit next time. Daria just said that she just wanted to visit one of her former students. After that, she wanted to ask Professor Hubert why he allowed Russell to use the archives of the professor's library. At first, Professor Hubert thought that Russell had done something bad, but Daria said that she simply had not seen such an interesting student for a long time. Then Professor Hubert told Daria that Russell had such a rare disease as a narrowing of the mana veins. However, Daria told Professor Hubert that Russell had successfully overcome his congenital illness. Daria also added that in addition to this, Rascal was able to reach the second magic circle, which greatly surprised Professor Hubert. Meanwhile, Russell entered the arena against Anton, and everyone was eagerly awaiting their battle. When Russell went down to Anton in the arena, a message appeared in front of him, which said that Russell must defeat Anton in this fight, after which he will receive a magic compartment. Russell thought that only the richest magicians could use the magic compartment, and he should take the opportunity to get it for winning this competition. At this point, Anton told Russell that if he wanted to avoid a fight, he would have to start begging him. Russell just grinned at these words, after which he tuned in for battle. Anton at first could not believe that Russell could use such heavy and powerful magic. At that moment, one of the professors of the academy ordered Anton and Russell to get into position and start the fight. Following the professor's command, Anton prepared his magical ability to attack Russell. At this moment, Anton couldn't understand how a man with weak mana veins like Russell could use the magic of the second circle. Anton then used his magical fire move to attack Russell. The moment Anton's fire attack almost reached Russell, he used magic armor to repel the entire oncoming attack. One of the professors was pleasantly surprised at how Russell was able to use his protective magic. However, the professor who called Anton into the arena was perplexed that Russell was able to use such magic at all, when before that he could not use any magical techniques. Anton did not understand how Russell could reflect his fire attacks so easily, and over time, his mana pool began to slowly decrease. Russell notices that Anton has used up all his mana, and he decides that he can now attack him himself. As an attacking magic, Russell decided to use fire arrows against Anton. At this moment, Anton was finally convinced that Russell was still able to reach the second magic circle. Then Anton decided to use his defensive magic so that Russell could not hit him with his fire arrows. Despite the high strength of Anton's shield, it was very difficult for him to contain it for further protection. Anton was also very surprised by how quickly Russell was able to create a second fire arrow. Then a whole hail of fiery arrows flew into Anton's protective dome. One of the professors thought that Russell had used a double throw, but the second professor explained that Russell had such a high speed of creating fire arrows that it could create the illusion that he was throwing 2 arrows at once. Russell continued to attack Anton with his fire arrows, and Anton decided that it was time for him to change his standard defensive magic to a shield that better protected against fire attacks. Anton hoped that Russell would continue his attempts to attack him with fire arrows, and when his mana ran out, he would be able to attack him with ease. However, despite Anton's move, Russell deliberately attacked him with fire arrows for a long time so that Anton would think of changing his shield, after which he would use another technique. Russell then prepared his wind arrow to easily knock Anton out of his defensive position. When Russell used his wind arrow, Anton's defenses disappeared and he began to be blown away by a strong current of wind. Spectators and professors were even more surprised at how skillfully Russell fought the battle in his favor. A few seconds later, Anton still lands on the ground, after which he was going to try to attack Russell. But as soon as Anton touched the ground, Russell immediately prepared to attack Anton with his fists. In order to enhance his attacks, Russell used some magical enhancements, such as fire and lightning enhancements. One of the professors demanded to stop the competition, since Russell does not use magic. However, Professor Hubert asked not to draw hasty conclusions and asked to pay attention to Russell's coverage. Then the other professors noticed that Russell was using his mana as knight armor. Professor Hubert did not know how Russell was able to achieve such success in using magic in practice, but he definitely understood that Russell created and used all these techniques on his own. Russell beat Anton so long and severely that a crater formed in its place, in which lay the body of Anton, who by that time was already unconscious. Everyone was shocked by how easily Russell was able to defeat Anton, who had been pestering Russell and offending him for a very long time. Then Professor Hubert reminded that it was time to announce the winner of the competition. After this, one of the professors announced Russell as the winner of today's match. A minute later this professor came down to Russell and told him that he could go. However, Russell said that according to the rules of the class, if the winner gets to choose his next opponent if he doesn't give up. The students who were sitting on the platform were very scared, as each of them was afraid that any of them could become his next opponent. Russell looked into the crowd and chose as his new opponent another student who had bullied Russell. A message also appeared in front of Russell, in which it was written that for each victory in the arena he would receive an additional reward, which only motivated Russell more to continue fighting. After class, Professor Hubert couldn't stop thinking about how Russell was able to win in the arena as many as 14 times without losing a single loss. Professor Hubert also thought that Daria was very insightful, since she was able to see such potential in Russell. However, Professor Hubert was still haunted by how Russell was able to overcome the narrowing of his mana veins and learn to wield magic so masterfully. Meanwhile, Russell returned after class, and a bunch of messages appeared in front of him about receiving magic stones and another unknown item. An unknown cloud of energy appeared in front of Russell, which looked like a black hole, and Russell believed that this was the magic compartment into which all the awards he received would now fall. When Russell stuck his hand into the magic compartment and pulled out a card with a mark, which turned out to be that same unknown object. When Russell took out the map from the magic compartment, a new message appeared in front of him about a new task, in which he had to go to the place indicated on the map, and in order to complete this task, Russell must have a third magic circle available. In his past life, Russell repeatedly tried to gain access to the third magic circle, but all his attempts to do this were unsuccessful, and he was not sure whether he would be able to open the third circle for himself in this life. In addition, Russell did not understand where the place that was indicated on the map was located, since he had not seen this place on other maps. Then Russell decided to use books from the professor's library, hoping to find in them a map of the area that was on his map. Russell began to carefully study each book that showed the exact territories of the entire empire, hoping to find some information about the location on the map. A lot of time passed. Russell checked dozens of books in the library, and none of them mentioned the place that was indicated on his map. Russell was very sorry for all the time he spent searching for this place. However, Russell didn't dwell on it as he also needed to reach the third magic circle. This time, Russell passed by the students of the academy and felt on himself how people still consider him an outcast despite the fact that he finally coped with all his offenders. At that moment, Professor Hubert approached Russell to ask him to look into his office when he was free. Russell said that he would be happy to visit him right away, after which they both went to Professor Hubert's office. Professor Hubert, pouring Russell a cup of tea, tells him that the summer holidays are about to start, and he wanted to ask him if he had any plans for the summer. Russell told the professor that he had nothing planned for the summer yet. Then Professor Hubert invited Russell to work with him on a joint research project. Professor Hubert also added that if Russell did well, his name might end up in the author's line, along with the name of the professor himself. During the conversation, Russell noticed several promotional brochures with pictures of tropical coasts on the coffee table. On one of these advertising brochures, Russell noticed an area that very much reminded him of the very area on his map. When Professor Hubert fell silent, Russell hesitantly said that he had some plans for the summer holidays. Professor Hubert was a little surprised that Russell remembered his holiday plans so abruptly. Russell handed Professor Hubert a brochure with a picture of a tropical coast, and said that he wanted to go there and relax for a while. With the onset of the summer holidays, Russell went on vacation by carriage. During the trip, Russell thought that the road would be long, and he decided to find something edible in his magic compartment. Russell took out a couple of magic stones from the magic compartment and ate them, hoping that this would at least satisfy his hunger. At one point, the man who was driving Russell in his carriage suddenly felt how hot he suddenly became. It turns out that at this moment Russell decided to discover the third magic circle for himself before he reached the shore. Meanwhile, Professor Hubert was in some kind of bewilderment that Russell suddenly wanted to go to the sea. However, Professor Hubert thought that it was good that Russell decided to rest, and hoped that Daria was already resting there. Daria sunbathed on the beach, drank a cocktail, and thought about the last time she had such a rest. Daria couldn't stop thinking about the fact that she was very tired of such things as defending the empire, presenting magical research, and even teaching students. Then Daria remembered one of her common lessons with all her students. On this day, Daria told the students about the importance of such numbers for magicians as 9, 6 and 3. The number 9 for magicians meant the end point in the development of the abilities and skills of the magician on the 9th magic circle. The number 6 symbolized the end of the tests that a person went through to become a great magician and reach the 6th magic circle. The number 3 indicated the beginning of a person's path as a new independent magician. At one point, Daria remembered Russell, and she wondered if he was doing everything in the study of magic. After a few hours, Russell's carriage finally reached its destination, and the man called out to Russell that they had finally arrived. The man began to worry that Russell still did not react to his words, and he decides to find out what is the matter. The man was very frightened when he saw Russell in the carriage, who lost consciousness during the trip. A couple of hours later, Russell already had a hearty lunch at one of the local restaurants. The fact is that during the trip, Russell could not withstand the load that he experienced during the trip, and for the rest of the way he lay unconscious, and after the trip the man tried to take his body to one of the local doctors. But despite such unpleasant consequences, Russell still managed to reach the third magic circle. Russell was overjoyed that he was finally able to achieve in a few months in this life what he could not achieve in his past life. However, Russell thought that this would not be enough for him, and he was going to develop his skills and abilities further. After lunch, Russell was about to go to a place on the map, and he was a little worried, since this was the first time he was going to go on such a serious matter, and he did not know where he should start. Then Russell accidentally heard a man on the street offering an inexpensive tour of the Pompeo volcano, from where Russell was going to set out on a mission, and he decides to take advantage of this opportunity. There was a legend that Pompeo used to be an ordinary mountain, which turned into a volcano after the awakening of a mythical creature. This mythical creature was a huge red dragon that burst out of the depths of the earth through this mountain and made it into a powerful volcano. At one point, Russell decides to take advantage of the moment and escape from the excursion to his main goal. While the rest of the tourists were preparing to go further along the route, Russell ran out of the crowd and jumped down from a high ravine. The main reason why Russell came here was that he wanted to find a connection between his appearance in this new life and the dragon. When Russell reached the point indicated on the map, he found himself in front of a high waterfall. When Russell wanted to look at the map to make sure that he had come to the right place, a small bright golden light flew out of the map, which Russell had to follow to complete a new task. As soon as the light appeared, it immediately rushed towards the waterfall and flew past it. Russell remembered from his assignment that now he must follow a bright flying light. Russell then used his wind arrow to disperse the powerful water flow and pass through it. When Russell jumped over the waterfall, he found himself inside a cave in which no one else had probably been in it before. When Russell was tasked with arriving at this location, he was warned that he would need at least a third magic circle to proceed further, but there were no potential enemies in the cave. Having walked a little further, Russell saw in front of him a lot of columns that had probably been built here many years ago. Also not far from the columns there was a large stone gate, from which a terrible howl could be heard. Russell became curious about what was hiding behind that stone door, and he decided to approach it and find out what was hidden behind it. Russell came closer and closer to the mysterious door, and he remembered from a past life that if there were no monsters or enemies nearby, it only meant that some large and dangerous creature lived in this place. Then a large creature covered with scales appeared in front of Russell's face, and Russell believed that it was a Komodo lizard, which was very dangerous for people. As soon as Russell realized this, the lizard immediately tried to attack him with its strong tail, whose blow could crush even a stone. Russell managed to dodge the lizard's attack, thinking that it was the only monster that could be finished off by at least 2 squads of professional mercenaries. Russell felt that he was unlikely to be able to cope with such an opponent, and that he could only run away from her as quickly as possible. However, Russell still decided to try to defeat the lizard and move on to the stone gate. Then Russell decided to use an electric arrow to inflict at least some significant damage on the lizard. After such a technique, the lizard was thrown to the side from such an attack, which slowed it down a little. Russell decides to take advantage of this moment and run to the stone gate as quickly as possible. As soon as Russell reached the stone gate, 2 nearby stone guards blocked his passage and told him to prove with his mana that he was worthy to enter inside. By that time, the lizard had already regained its strength and was ready to attack Russell. Then Russell decided that since the battle was inevitable for him anyway, he must finish off this lizard once and for all with all his might. To do this, Russell was going to use his magic skill Fire Pillar, hoping that this skill would incinerate the lizard to ashes. A second before Russell used his magic skill, the lizard stopped in front of him and stopped trying to attack him. After a couple of seconds, the lizard bowed down in front of Russell as a sign of his superiority over her. At that moment, the large red stone on the stone gate lit up with a bright light and the gate opened, where Russell immediately walked through. As soon as Russell passed through the stone gate, he noticed that he seemed to have lost consciousness and found himself in an ice room. In addition, there were a lot of ice golem figures in this ice room. Russell theorized that it was Bala teleportation magic that transported him to the ice room at the exact moment he passed through the stone gate in the cave. When Russell finally regained his senses, he saw at one end of the room a large dragon's tail, which was tied with long and strong chains. After that, a message appeared in front of Russell, which said that Russell must defeat all the ice golems in this room, using fire magic to do this. At that moment, all the golems in the room suddenly stirred and were ready to attack Russell. Then Russell decided to use his fire magic and defeat all the ice golems. In order to defeat any golem, you must first get to its core and destroy it. But no matter how hard Russell tried, his magical fire attacks did not cause any serious damage to the golems. Russell then decided that if his fire attacks did not cause any damage to the golems, then he should use his wind magic. But no matter how hard Russell tried, he could not cast the spell to summon his wind arrows. Then Russell did not waste any time and decides to evade the numerous attacks of the ice golems. After this, Russell remembered that the main condition for passing this test was the use of only fire magic, which is why he could not use other magical techniques. While Russell was thinking, one of the ice golems managed to knock Russell down and render him harmless. At this moment, a bunch of huge ice golems were ready to kill Russell. Russell then decided to use his flame pillar move on the ice golems, which he previously wanted to use on the Komodo lizard from the cave. Russell's entire body burned with a bright flame, while horror and fear were clearly visible on the faces of the golems. Russell immediately began to slowly but surely melt the ice golems approaching him one by one. However, this move consumed too much mana, and if he continued to destroy the golems like this, then he simply did not have enough mana to disable the rest of the golems. So Russell began to come up with a new strategy to deal with the remaining opponents. If you try to concentrate all your blow on one desired place, you can easily defeat any enemy, and Russell decided to use this strategy. First of all, Russell was going to move as far away from the steel golems as possible in order to buy himself time to prepare all the necessary spells. Next, Russell created a fire arrow, on which he applied a magic formula for enhancing damage and strengthening a double pillar of fire. The final step to making Russell's move as effective as possible was a compression formula that would connect all the arrows he created and enhanced. In the process of completing the compression, one ice golem approached Russell, which was about to knock Russell down and thereby interrupt his streak of spells. However, Russell manages to compress all the received arrows together, and thereby defeat all the ice golems closest to him. As a result of such spells, Russell found himself in the hands of a completely new fire weapon that no one had been able to create before, an enhanced fire spear. At that moment, a message appeared in front of Russell about reaching an exorbitant level of understanding of the fire element. Russell could feel his fire spear emitting a power that was comparable to the power of spells of the fifth circle of magic. However, this spear used up a lot of mana even when Russell simply held it in his hands. Then Russell decides that he has no time to waste and managed to finish off all the golems before his mana runs out. Then Russell rushed to the attack, and thus he neutralized 3 golems in a matter of seconds. There were only 4 ice golems left in the room, and with every second there were fewer and fewer of them. After a few seconds, Russell had defeated almost all the golems, and he only had to defeat 1 golem to complete the task and get out of the ice room. However, this time Russell did not have time to react to the sudden attack of the last golem, which managed to knock Russell down. Fortunately, Russell managed to repel the attack of the golem with his fire spear and did not receive any serious injuries from this. However, Russell's mana was running low, and he needed to deal with the last ice golem as quickly as possible. Then Russell decides to throw his fiery spear at the enemy, hoping that the enemy will be defeated. When Russell threw a fire lance, it pierced through the golem's body and rendered him harmless. Russell was incredibly happy about his victory, after which he fell to the icy floor, unable to find the strength to continue to stand on his feet. When Russell fell to the floor, a message appeared in front of him that the quest chain had been completed and that he had received the magic stones and the Forgotten King's Horn as a reward. When the task was counted as successfully completed, the Forgotten Horn of the King, which was hanging in the ice room, broke free of its chains and burst into flames. After this, the king's forgotten horn began to emit a blindingly bright light, which transported Russell into the king's thoughts. When Russell woke up, he found himself in an unknown place, where his body was bound in several chains. At this moment, a message appeared in front of Russell about successfully moving into the king's thoughts to receive an additional reward. Then Russell heard an unfamiliar voice in his head, which told Russell that he was the very magician who was able to pass the test and find himself in the thoughts of a sacred being. At that moment, the forgotten horn of the king appeared, which had previously hung on chains in the ice room. After this, the king's forgotten horn pierced Russell's body, causing him to experience incredible pain. As the king's forgotten horn was completely absorbed into Russell's body, an incredible amount of mana began to flow out of it. Russell's pain became stronger every second, and his body emitted more and more mana, and at one moment Russell thought that he was about to be torn apart. When all this torment of Russell ended, he found himself on the seashore and did not understand how it all happened to him. When Russell finally regained consciousness, a bunch of messages appeared in front of him, saying that all of Russell's excess mana would be converted into potential, and that he had reached an advanced level of understanding the fire element. Then Russell decided to test his current strength, which was increased due to excess mana. Russell thought that his previous test was worth it in order to receive such a powerful enhancement, with which he could very soon receive the fourth magic circle. A few seconds later, Daria was next to Russell, who was very glad to see Russell here. When they returned to the resting place, Daria said that she felt a powerful magical surge, and she decided to find out what happened there. And at the place of the surge she saw Russell. Russell only thanked Daria for her concern and said that he did not expect to meet her here at all. Meanwhile, Daria was looking at Russell and noticed that his mana had become even purer, and how he almost reached the third magic circle. Russell wanted to ask Daria what brought her here, to which she replied that this place was her homeland. Daria said that she comes here every summer to take a break from all this magical routine, after which she asked Russell why he came here. Russell felt that it was too early to say that he had come here on a mission. Then Russell said that he just wanted to look at the beauty of this world. After that, Daria asked Russell if he could help her with one very important thing. After that, Daria snapped her fingers, and the sign of a fire tower appeared on Russell's cloak. Daria told Russell that the matter would not be difficult at all, after which a message appeared in front of him with a task to intercept a pirate ship with captives on board. Daria said that human trafficking is prohibited in this city, and therefore such ships usually do not stop at the port and pass by. However, among these ships there are those who, despite all the prohibitions, allow themselves to land on the coast. Closer to the night, Russell and Daria went by boat to the alleged landing of a pirate ship. Daria said that despite the fact that she could deal with the pirates alone, it was more important for her to free the prisoners and, if possible, appropriate the ship, and therefore she made a detailed plan for their further actions with Russell. Russell suggested that he and Daria only need to pretend that they were going to attack in order to scare off the pirates. Russell was haunted only by why Daria chose him as her assistant, when hundreds of excellent magicians are ready at any moment to come to her at her one call. Then Russell considered that this was not just a task, but some form of test. Having reached the ship, Daria told Russell that everything that would happen on this ship might shock him somewhat. Daria also added that defenders cannot always be gentle and soft on a mission, and there is nothing terrible or shameful in this, since they are simply doing what they are supposed to do. After that, Daria jumped out of the boat into the air and said that while she was distracting the pirates, Russell would have to save the prisoners at that moment. When Daria flew high enough, she used a special magic that caused a very bright flash to appear in her place. The people on the ship saw a bright flash and thought that someone decided to attack them. Then the pirates loaded their crossbows and prepared to fend off this bright light. The pirates fired hundreds of arrows from their guns at once, but not a single arrow reached Daria. The pirates realized that this way they would not be able to fight off the perceived threat, and they decided to use their heavy artillery. Daria believed that only idiots had gathered on this ship, who hoped that they could hide in her native land with impunity. After that, Daria threw the petals of her fiery rose on board the pirate ship. When the burning petals were on board the ship began to burn in some places, and the pirates tried their best to avoid further spread of fire. However, with any attempt to put out the fire, dwarfs of a burning tree began to come out of its special fiery demons, the call of which was Daria's signature move. At this point, Russell had already managed to climb aboard the ship and thereby not attract any extra attention. Once on deck, Russell noticed how the pirates were fighting with the fire dwarfs, who had already burned down an entire castle in a matter of seconds. But no matter how hard the pirates tried, none of them managed to defeat a single dwarf. One of the fire dwarfs even burned the body of one of the pirates, causing him to experience hellish pain as his body burned alive. Russell was somewhat surprised by this sight, but despite this he decided not to linger and begin to free the prisoners. Meanwhile, in the hold, the prisoners heard that someone had attacked the pirate fleet, and they believed that they would be freed very soon. However, the pirate who was watching the prisoners told them that under no circumstances would they be able to get out of here. Having discovered the place where the prisoners were, Russell decides to take advantage of the moment and neutralize it. Russell grabbed the pirate by the neck and used lightning magic to give the pirate a strong electric shock, after which he would no longer pose any threat. One of the prisoners saw Russell and asked him if he could free them and let them off the ship. Russell said that he would free them, but for now they would have to wait a bit until the pirates arrived. Russell did not understand how these pirates managed to fit so many people in this small hold. Taking a closer look, Russell noticed that these pirates also take small children prisoner, which made him even more angry with the pirates. At that moment, several pirates had already come running into the hold, who wanted to check if everything was in order here. Then the pirates noticed Russell in the hold next to the lying body of the beholder, after which one of the pirates ordered everyone else to attack Russell. When a small group of pirates ran towards Russell, Russell was about to use one of his lightning magic tricks. Russell used magic that attacked all the pirates approaching him with a powerful electric charge, which was able to disable all the pirates in the hold. After that, Russell went to the next room to find out how many prisoners were there. Entering the next room, Russell drew attention to one large cage, which was several times larger than those cages that were in the previous room. Russell created a glowing ball and saw that there were a lot of elves in this cage. One of the elves noticed the sign of the fire tower on Russell's cloak, and this elf asked him if it belonged to the fire tower. Russell said that he was not yet a member of the fire tower community, after which this elf interrupted Russell, not giving him a chance to finish. Then this elf stood in front of Russell and told him to open this door already. Russell from the very beginning wanted to free all the prisoners, but the manner of communication of this elf began to excite him a little. A woman's voice came from the other end of the cage, telling the elf to shut up and watch his manners. All the elves dispersed, and Russell saw at the other end of the cage an adult-looking elf who looked very exhausted and tired. The elf rose to her feet and began to approach the grate, telling the rest of the prisoners that this was far from an ordinary person. Approaching the grate, the elf said that Russell had the same pure mana as the sunlight itself. The elves did not fully understand why Russell was considered as some kind of unusual person. The elf said that this man did not smell of souls at all. The elves could not believe that this man did not smell of souls at all. Russell didn't understand what kind of soul odor these elves were talking about, and he began sniffing around himself to make sure he wasn't smelling anything. Then the elf who first spoke to Russell apologized to him for his behavior and asked him to release them. After that, all the other elves bowed to Russell and began to beg him to release them from here. Russell was surprised to see how the elves, who were known for their great conceit, immediately bowed their heads to him. Then Russell considered that this elf was the most important among them here. Since Russell did not have the keys to the cage with him, he decides to simply melt the lock with fire magic. While Russell was trying to melt the castle, the elf asked him if he had defeated all the enemies and bosses before freeing them. The elf said that they are much stronger than the usual enemies that are on the ship. Outside, meanwhile, the pirates were still trying to take down Daria's fiery dwarfs, while the ship's captain stood at the helm and watched it all. After a few seconds, the captain of the ship still decides to go down and try to defeat at least one fire dwarf, and he succeeds without any problems. When the captain went down to the rest of the pirates, he started yelling at them because they couldn't handle some fire dwarfs. After that, the captain looked towards Daria and told her that he could handle her without any problems. Daria looked at all this and never ceased to be amazed at such naivety. After a couple of seconds, Daria finally decided to take them down to the ship. The ship's captain introduced himself to Daria as Don Cook, one of the most dangerous pirates in the entire empire. Daria noticed that Don Cook was using the battle aura that Imperial Knights usually used, and she asked him why he was doing this if he used to be a knight. Don Cook said that his knightly honor, unlike the pirate code, was not able to feed him and pay taxes.